Today's topic, we're talking about the NFL, and if you guys happen to watch the Super Bowl, you saw that they had not only one ad, but a suite of ads about Black Lives Matter and coming together as a nation for racial justice.
We're about to do a deep dive into... I'm sorry.
If you are anything like me, you played football in middle school, which is pretty much one stop before going to the league, basically. I was the options player. I played every position. So anytime someone was sick, they would call me to join. Not because I was that good, but because we just didn't have enough players. Which means that you're not very plugged in to football in general. But what you did know about the NFL is that they were icing out Colin Kaepernick. You then happen to, be watching the football. The football. Back in 2016, Kaepernick had actually decided to sit for the anthem as it was played 2 times. And the third time that he sat out, that was when people started to take note and it actually became a national story. I'm not going to stand up to show pride in a flag for a country that oppresses black people and people of color. To me, this is bigger than football and would be selfish on my part to look the other way. There are bodies on the street and people getting paid leave and getting away with murder. So really here, he's talking about police brutality, how the police interact with black folk in this country. There's exorbitant data that shows that, yes, there is disproportionate violence against black people in this country, which I think at that point in 2016 was a harder kind of argument to make. People like Trayvon Martin, Tamir Rice, BLM, and all that stuff hadn't fully taken root, I think, in national conversation to the degree that it has now, especially after George Floyd. So for him to have this stance, not necessarily this early, but at that time, I think, one, was extremely brave. And also, I think it was a point at which people were hearing rhetoric that they hadn't heard before, and they were just like, I don't know how to interact with this in a generous reading.
People took this action of his and created a conclusion of it that immediately became the greater source of conflict. This idea that Colin Kaepernick was disrespecting the military by taking a knee, something like there is systemic racism in our country, is much harder to grapple with. Kaepernick was being criticized on the merits of, you are disrespecting this obviously really great thing. And then on the other hand, your issue requires a much stronger burden of proof for us to believe you.
I think that's something that we see very, very, very frequently. Instead of fully engaging with what Colin Kaepernick is saying, which is, hey, there's police brutality in this country, the counter argument to that is, no, there isn't, and here's why. Instead, we sidestep the issue entirely and we say it's about the troops. Similarly, right, during the George Floyd protests, instead of saying, hey, you know what, we do actually need to grapple with systemic racism and violence in America, it became about, it's Antifa, and the riots are very violent. Targets are being destroyed. Cities are being burned. There probably should be a space where we talk about how these protests are happening, but also we're still not fundamentally engaging with why these things are happening, and that's way more important. After all of this went down, Kaepernick was essentially iced out of the league, right? Wasn't able to renew his contract. That ended up in 2019, further down the line, resulting in a settlement where he sued basically the NFL, being like, hey, you guys are icing me out of this. They settled over it. After he was out of the league, Nike was like, yo, we like what you're doing, and they ended up signing a deal with him.
The idea was that, Kaepernick would be benefiting from increasing his public profile, and therefore, this isn't about the issues. He doesn't care about racism, he cares about himself.
What a slut.
What a racist slut. To take Kaepernick ultimately being rewarded with a Nike contract for his activism as proof that his activism was just about getting those things for himself.
I think that is a genuinely interesting question. Can you be a genuine agent of change, a genuine activist, if on the back end you're benefiting from your willingness to be outspoken? It'd be a little bit more different if Colin Kaepernick were like, hey, institutionalized racism and violence is bad, and then on the back end he was a police officer who was blasting fools, right? Then it's like, okay, you are being directly hypocritical. But when it's just like, hey, I have a belief, a corporation like Nike is like, hey, we want to support you for standing up for what you believe in, that feels like it's not being hypocritical. He was able to get himself a good deal.
A criticism of Kaepernick was the idea that even as an NFL player, you're making millions of dollars each year. You can't possibly possibly be affected by this thing that's happening. Even though we've seen plenty of instances of professional athletes being profiled.
Yeah. Or even more than that, some Harvard professor was like locked out of his house and the police were called on him. Bro, it doesn't matter who you are or how much money you're making, because it's not about those things. It's about, right? It's about what you look like.
Kaepernick paid a price. He was out of the league for years. That was his source of income that he willingly gave up.
Imagine being upset like, oh, so you found a way to sustain yourself financially at the cost of your own social standing in your literal job. You're a bad person, aren't you? It's like, bro. Yes. But no, that's not really the case.
Colin Kaepernick ended up speaking with a veteran about the significance of the gesture itself, of sitting during the anthem, and came to the conclusion that he would then take a knee during the anthem.
He has done all of that work, and all the other side has done is say, you are a bad person. If this is... Where's the camera? If this is the work that he's been doing, all right, they've done beep. They've done that much. I think that in and of itself tells you who is putting in a good faith argument, right? And who actually cares about what is happening here. The people that are interested in the status quo can sit back and basically not care because they're not affected by it.
Protesting needs to be disruptive to at least the tiniest of degrees, I think, for it to have any effect whatsoever. And so it's important in that way. People were asking themselves in a deflective as hell argument, well, sports are only here to entertain me, and I shouldn't have to be exposed to a lesson that I don't want to be exposed to. Which to me, I think is complete balderdash when you consider the national anthem is an expression of values, right? Values that we do agree to be good for the most part, right? And even Kaepernick, who was saying, I'm not doing this because I hate the troops.
Our entertainment is not values neutral. The very fact that the national anthem is a part of the NFL's program is a value, and the value is patriotism. So for the argument to be, I don't want values in my programming, I don't want, to see anything political in my programming, you wouldn't have the national anthem in the NFL to begin with.
Yeah. You wouldn't have interviews with the players after every game talking about...
we did the right thing, 100%, we executed.
Teamwork,
Hey, that's a value, you fucker. All right, no fucking teamwork. I don't want to hear a fucking word about it.
But yeah, because there's entertainment value in... Look at these players who I like and respect talking about hard work and teamwork. Value. This episode's sponsored by Values.
At the end of the day, all of this demonstrates is we're comfortable with the values that make us feel comfortable, right? Like at the moment that it actually starts to implicate ourselves, actually makes us examine who we are as a society, we start to get uncomfortable with that. Maybe we can do a little bit more to expand our minds, just a little bit, right? To be comfortable with the idea that, hey, maybe everything that I find comfortable with the world isn't what everyone else thinks is okay and comfortable. 4 years later, after George Floyd, Ahmaud Arbery, and Breonna Taylor were murdered,
yeah, maybe he was onto something all those years ago.
That very well transitions us into talking about where the NFL is today. In June of this past year, like very shortly after what happened to George Floyd, a bunch of players, I guess it was just a video of them, basically saying, yo, NFL, are you going to say definitively, yeah, racism is bad?
This is what we, the players,
would like to hear you state.
We, the National Football League,
condemn racism and the systematic oppression of black people.
About a week later, the NFL commissioner released a statement of his own, basically condemning institutionalized racism. The landscape is very different. To go from Colin Kaepernick, you are bad the boy for what you did.
Very bad.
Very naughty boy.
Very naughty bad boy.
Bring that bottom over here. Spank.
All right, I don't endorse that.
To go from that to go from spanking Kaepernick's big round booty to, hey, you know what? We're down for BLM, right? That is night and day. I think there are a couple ways that you can really consider kind of this shift in stance. I think the first thing is, if you were a layperson like me, an options player, if you will, you're not really super tuned in to the NFL. So I had heard about Colin Kaepernick and how the NFL was treating him, and then I tuned into the Super Bowl this year, and seeing that night and day switch, from a marketing perspective, it makes sense that the NFL is going to kind of capitalize on how many lay people like myself are tuned into the Super Bowl to make as definitive a statement as they did. It is a marketably salient move for you to be like, hey, let's demonstrate that we are on the right side of history now to the most amount of people possible.
The reality is, we will never know how genuinely the NFL does believe what they're now leaning into marketing-wise. But again, what we do know is they did have an opportunity to be at the forefront of this when it probably would not have benefited marketing-wise to be supporting the words of this athlete, and they didn't do it.
As cynical as we're being, the reality is they made a definitive statement that is the right take. And I think they also decided to donate $250 million to BLM, right? A lot of money. That's $250 million, right?
To you, maybe. To my family. But a mere morsel of money. A week's allowance.
That is a material, real good that you can go out into the world and touch. Maybe not me personally. I can't touch $250 million, but BLM...
And I just choose not to, but it's something you can do. Material and good, yes.
That is going to affect those organizations that receive that money. Which brings me to the question of, are corporations allowed to learn? Roger Goodell, no matter what you have to say about him, no matter how authentic he's being, definitively said, we were wrong and we're sorry. Is it worthwhile continuing to almost bludgeon them with their past failure when they're trying to do the right thing? And I think that's a broader question, not just about corporations, but also about individual action, something like cancel culture. We don't need to go down that rabbit hole, but it just reminds me of that. And what makes the burden a bit heavier for corporations is that an individual like Colin Kaepernick has a lot to lose by doing what they think is the right thing. A corporation, yes, has something to lose, right? Their bottom line, their ratings, how many people are tuned in, their sponsorship deals, ad revenue, all that kind of stuff. But also they're big enough to take that hit. There's an arc to these social issues, and it feels like where the NFL and a lot of other corporations after George Floyd was murdered hopped onto the train was, damn, it's now an awful look if we don't hop on this. That really just speaks to the amount of social pressure that needs to be applied to these institutions that are unwilling to change unless there is an earth-shattering event like George Floyd and a lot of your players being like, hey, just say the right thing for once. Finally, please, I'm begging you.
And this all, sort of raises the question too of how important is it that our corporations need to be signaling these things? Right? Do we really care what Subway has to say about social justice, or can we not help but immediately categorize it into, well, you are sort of benefiting from preaching this too now? Because I think what we've sort of been circling around a lot is this practice of there is one part of the thing that you're doing that I don't like, and therefore the whole thing is wrong. I'm able to prove from this that the whole of the argument is invalid. If we're going to get anywhere, that requires a give and take, where a side might propose their beliefs and none of it might resonate with you whatsoever, but at least those conversations are being had, so long as people are attempting to debunk whatever it is that's being talked about in their own head, challenge their own points of view. If that's not happening, then there won't be progress.
We want to hear what you think. Is it necessary? Is it good for corporations to value signal in these really grand ways? Right? Where do you fall on this issue of Colin Kaepernick and the NFL? We want to continue that conversation with you, so let us know. I'm trying to go play some Pop Warner, bro.
Bro, only if we're boycotting it, my man.
Come on, give me some, duh. We'll see you guys out there.